Uriel Calloway stepped out of his black luxury sedan, the city lights of Seattle reflecting off the polished surface as he adjusted the cuff of his custom-tailored suit. The air was damp with the scent of rain, a signature of the Pacific Northwest. But inside the grand entrance of the Cascade Grand Hotel, everything was pristine, untouched by the elements. He had been here countless times before. Lavish business dinners, networking events, personal retreats when he needed an escape from the world he had built for himself. But tonight, something felt different. An unsettling weight pressed against his chest, though he couldn't quite place why. As he entered, the towering chandelier cast a warm glow over the marble floors, its crystals shimmering like diamonds. Hotel staff moved with rehearsed efficiency, tending to guests who whispered about multi-million-dollar deals over champagne flutes. The scent of expensive cologne and aged whiskey filled the air. He should have felt at home here. Instead, he felt nothing. "Mr. Calloway," a smooth voice called from behind the front desk. Rachel Monroe, his executive assistant, approached with the efficiency of someone who had worked under his relentless schedule for years. "Your suite is ready, and the meeting with the investors is confirmed for tomorrow morning at 9. "Good." Uriel barely glanced at her, his mind already calculating the next 12 hours in his head. It was always about the next move, the next deal, the next milestone. "Any issues I need to be aware of?" Rachel hesitated, something rare for her. "No, just the usual requests for your time. Oh, and Marcus Grayson will also be in attendance at the conference." Uriel's jaw tensed at the mention of his longtime business rival. "Of course he will." Rachel adjusted her glasses, as if debating whether to say more. Instead, she handed him the keycard to his penthouse suite. "Would you like me to have dinner sent up to your room?" "No, I'll be fine." Rachel nodded, her expression unreadable, before returning to the reception desk. Uriel exhaled sharply and strode toward the elevators, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. His mind churned with the weight of upcoming negotiations, the battle for dominance in the industry, the pressure of maintaining his carefully curated image. Then he saw her. At first, she was just another hotel employee, hunched over, scrubbing the marble floor near the hallway leading to the executive suites. Her uniform, a faded blue, was slightly too large, and the cap she wore barely contained her long auburn hair. She moved quickly, as if trying to make herself invisible, her hands shaking as she scrubbed at an invisible stain. He wouldn't have looked twice. But something made him stop. Something made his stomach drop. The woman lifted her head for only a second, just long enough for him to see the shape of her face, the delicate line of her jaw, the unmistakable hazel eyes he had once known better than his own reflection. The mop in her hand slipped, clattering against the tile. She gasped, "Wesley." For a moment, the world stopped. The hum of polite conversation faded. The elegant lobby, the walls of wealth and grandeur, it all vanished. All that remained was the impossible truth standing before him. His ex-wife. A maid. Here. Uriel took a step forward, but she was already scrambling to pick up the mop, her fingers gripping the handle as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. She turned her back to him, keeping her head down, her movements rushed, desperate. "Wesley," his voice came out lower than he intended, thick with something he couldn't name. She flinched. It wasn't just recognition, it was fear. Julia Adams, the hotel manager, approached from the other end of the corridor, her sharp heels clicking against the floor. "Harper," she called, not even noticing Uriel's presence. "What's the hold-up?" "I need the executive wing spot list before tomorrow morning." Wesley nodded quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I'm almost done." "Make it quick," Julia said, her tone clipped before disappearing around the corner. Uriel clenched his fists. What the hell was going on? Wesley, the woman who once wore diamonds and silk, who used to sip champagne at charity galas and discuss art exhibitions with Seattle's elite, was now scrubbing floors in a hotel that catered to men like him. He stepped closer. "You work here?" She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. "Wesley." His voice was firmer now. Finally, she straightened, turning to face him, her chin lifted despite the tremor in her hands. "Please, Uriel, just go." Go? After 8 years? After a divorce that tore them both apart? "Not until you explain," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Her hazel eyes darkened, but before she could answer, Julia's voice rang out again. "Harper, I said now." Wesley swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, Uriel saw something in her that he had never seen before. Defeat. She turned away without another word, gripping the mop and returning to work, as if the moment had never happened, as if he had never happened. Uriel stood there, his pulse pounding in his ears, watching her scrub the floor as though nothing in the world had changed, but everything had. Uriel Calloway stood frozen in the gleaming corridor of the Cascade Grand Hotel, his mind refusing to process what he had just seen. Wesley, his ex-wife, here, wearing a maid's uniform, scrubbing the floor like a stranger, like she had never been the woman who once shared his life, his home, his future. The realization sat like lead in his chest. His first instinct was disbelief. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. Maybe the dim lighting and the years that had passed had distorted reality. But then there was the way she looked at him. Like a ghost from her past had suddenly materialized, threatening to unravel whatever fragile existence she had managed to piece together. Uriel's fingers curled into his palm. He wasn't the kind of man to ignore what was right in front of him, and this needed an explanation. He turned abruptly, striding toward the front desk, where Rachel Monroe was typing something into her tablet. She barely had time to look up before he spoke. "I need a full employee roster," he said, his voice level but firm. Rachel blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." "For the hotel," Uriel clarified. "The staff list." She tilted her head slightly, adjusting her glasses. "That's an unusual request. Did something happen?" Uriel exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. He rarely let anything rattle him, but this was different. "Just get it for me," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Rachel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'll see what I can do." Uriel didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel, his thoughts spiraling as he headed toward the elevators. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that Wesley was here, or the fact that she had acted like she wanted nothing to do with him. Because that wasn't how it was supposed to be. Their last conversation had been an argument, sharp words thrown like knives, a bitter goodbye sealed by a divorce neither of them had truly wanted. But never, never had he imagined that she would end up like this. His chest tightened as the elevator doors slid shut. Wesley Harper had been raised in privilege. She had grown up in a world of charity galas, art collections and vacations in the south of France. Even when their marriage had been rocky, she had carried herself with the effortless grace of someone who belonged in high society. So why was she cleaning hotel floors? The question gnawed at him, refusing to let go. By the time he reached his penthouse suite, Uriel had made a decision. He needed answers, and he was going to get them. Wesley kept her head down as she finished her shift, her hands aching from hours of scrubbing, polishing, and folding. She knew she'd been careless earlier, letting her emotions get the best of her. She had been careful for years, meticulously avoiding any situation where she might run into someone from her past. And yet, fate had a cruel sense of humor. She had barely made it through her final checklist when Julia Adams appeared in the staff lounge, clipboard in hand, sharp gaze scanning the room. "Wesley, my office, now." A lump formed in her throat, but she nodded, quickly setting down her cleaning supplies. She knew better than to question a direct order. Julia's office was small but pristine, stacked with schedules, reports, and employee evaluations. The second Wesley stepped inside, Julia shut the door behind her. "Mind telling me what happened earlier?" Julia asked, crossing her arms. Wesley swallowed. A guest recognized you," Julia interrupted. "A very important guest." Wesley's breath hitched. Of course, Julia had noticed. Nothing escaped her. "I'm sorry," Wesley said quickly. "It won't happen again." Julia studied her for a long moment, then sighed, rubbing her temple. "Look, I don't have time for whatever mess your past is bringing into my hotel, but I do know Calloway, and I know his type." Wesley stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's not the kind of man to just walk away after what happened today," Julia said matter-of-factly. "He's going to ask questions. He's going to dig." Wesley's fingers curled against the fabric of her uniform. That was exactly what she was afraid of. "I need this job," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Julia studied her for a long moment before sighing again. "Then make sure whatever history you two have doesn't become my problem." Wesley nodded stiffly, turning to leave. But deep down, she knew it was already too late. Uriel didn't have to wait long. The next evening, he spotted Wesley just as she was finishing up the turn-down service for one of the VIP suites. She had her back to him, meticulously adjusting the pillows, smoothing the sheets with precise movements. She hadn't noticed him yet. "Good. I think we need to talk," he said. Wesley's entire body tensed. Slowly she turned, her expression carefully blank. "I'm working, Uriel." "That's not an answer," he said smoothly, stepping further into the room. She took a slow breath, her hands gripping the edge of the freshly made bed. "I don't owe you one." Uriel arched a brow. "You don't think I deserve an explanation?" She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "For what? For moving on? For figuring out my life after our marriage fell apart?" His jaw tightened. "This isn't moving on, Wesley. This is surviving." She flinched. He saw it, just for a second, and that second told him everything. She wasn't here by choice. Something had happened. Something she wasn't telling him. "Did you even try to reach out after the divorce?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "Or did you just assume I was fine? That I was living comfortably while you went on building your empire?" He stared at her, taken aback. "You left," he reminded her. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but she stopped herself. Instead, she stepped back, her expression guarded once more. "I have to finish my shift," she said quietly. He could have pushed. He wanted to. But instead, he nodded, stepping aside as she brushed past him, leaving him standing alone in the empty suite, the scent of freshly laundered sheets and the ghost of a life they once shared lingering in the air. And for the first time in years, Uriel realized something. He wasn't done with Wesley Harper, not even close. Uriel couldn't focus. The rest of the evening was a blur. Boardroom meetings, power dinners, conversations about investments and upcoming projects. But none of it mattered. His mind was still in that dimly lit hotel suite where Wesley had stood in front of him, her uniform too large for her frame, her voice sharp yet fragile. The woman who had once shared his bed, his home, his future, now cleaning hotel rooms like a stranger. And she refused to explain why. Uriel sat in the penthouse suite, the city stretching out before him through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline was drenched in rain, beads of water sliding down the glass in slow, winding trails. His reflections stared back at him, unreadable. Wesley Harper. Her name had once meant everything to him. Now it was a ghost that had come back to haunt him. A knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned, expecting Rachel, but when he opened it, he was met with the last person he expected, Henry Dawson. Uriel recognized him instantly. A little older than Wesley, the man had always been around her family's circles, never quite fitting in, never quite standing out. He had the look of someone who had worked hard his whole life, the kind of man who didn't belong in the polished world of Seattle's elite. Henry didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "If you're here to talk about Wesley," Uriel said coolly, "I suggest you get to the point." Henry crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here." Uriel arched a brow. "Excuse me?" "You saw her," Henry said, voice calm but firm. "You saw the way she looked at you. That woman has spent years trying to stay invisible, trying to rebuild her life. And then you show up, and now she's barely holding it together." Uriel's jaw tightened. "You think this is easy for me? Seeing her like that?" "I don't care what's easy for you," Henry shot back. "This isn't about you, Calloway. Wesley's been through enough." Uriel exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "Then why won't she tell me the truth?" Henry hesitated. Just for a second. Uriel saw it. "You know, don't you?" Uriel's voice was quiet, but laced with certainty. "You know what happened to her?" Henry looked away, his fingers flexing as if he wanted to say something, but then he shook his head. "It's not my place." Uriel stepped closer. "If it's not your place, then whose is it?" Henry met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Hers." Uriel clenched his jaw. He knew Henry wasn't going to give him anything more, but it only confirmed one thing. There was something Wesley wasn't telling him, and he wasn't going to let it go. Henry turned to leave but paused at the door. "You want to help her? Then stop digging. Let her be." Uriel didn't answer, because he knew he wasn't going to do that. Wesley gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at her reflection in the tiny bathroom mirror of her apartment. Her uniform was crumpled, the exhaustion in her eyes impossible to ignore. She ran the faucet, splashing cool water on her face, willing herself to breathe. The moment with Uriel had shaken her. She had spent years making sure her past stayed buried. But now, in the span of a single day, it had come crashing back. Because Uriel wasn't the kind of man to walk away from unanswered questions. She knew him. She knew his persistence, his ability to uncover the truth no matter how well it was hidden. And the truth was the last thing she could afford for him to know. A soft knock pulled her out of her thoughts. She turned, hesitating before opening the door. Zara stood there, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her sleepy eyes blinking up at her. "Mommy!" Zara's voice was small, her tiny fingers tugging at the hem of Wesley's sleeve. "Why do you look sad?" Wesley forced a smile, kneeling in front of her daughter. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just tired." Zara studied her as if trying to decide whether to believe her. "Is it because of Daddy?" Wesley's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Zara's lower lip wobbled. "Miss Lillian at school said that daddies and mommies are supposed to live together. She said that's how families work. But you don't live with Daddy." Wesley swallowed hard. "Sometimes families look different, my love. But that doesn't mean Daddy doesn't love you." "Do you love Daddy?" The question hit her like a train. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Zara yawned, rubbing her eyes. "I miss him." Wesley's throat tightened, but she nodded, gently brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I know, baby. I know." She tucked Zara back into bed, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. But even as her daughter drifted off to sleep, Wesley sat there, unmoving, staring at the ceiling. Because the question wasn't whether she still loved Uriel. The question was whether it even mattered anymore. Uriel sat in the hotel bar, his fingers wrapped around a crystal glass of whiskey he had barely touched. His mind was still stuck on Wesley, on the way she had looked at him, like he was a storm she had spent years trying to outrun, on Henry's warning, on the fact that none of this made sense. Twice in one night? A familiar voice cut through his thoughts. Uriel turned to see Rachel Monroe sliding into the seat across from him. her gaze sharp as she set her tablet on the table. "You're supposed to be reviewing tomorrow's investor reports," she said, arching a brow. Uriel leaned back in his seat. "I have other things on my mind." Rachel sighed, tapping her manicured nails against the tabletop. "You saw her, didn't you?" He didn't bother denying it. Rachel exhaled, shaking her head. "Uriel, listen to me. I don't know what happened between you two, but whatever it was, it's in the past. Apparently, the past has a way of showing up when you least expect it," he said dryly. Rachel hesitated before pulling up something on her tablet. "You asked for the employee roster earlier." Uriel straightened. "And—" Rachel turned the screen toward him. "Wesley Harper, hired 2 years ago, no prior work experience listed, no emergency contacts." Uriel's gaze narrowed. "That doesn't make sense." Rachel's voice lowered. "That's because she doesn't want to be found." Uriel's grip tightened around the glass. Something had happened. Something that had driven Wesley from a life of privilege to this. And he wasn't going to stop until he found out what. The next morning, Uriel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The early light filtered through the gray clouds, casting a dim glow over the city. It should have been a typical morning. His schedule packed with meetings, negotiations, and business deals that would cement his place in the industry. But none of it mattered. Not when his mind was still tangled in the impossible truth that Wesley was here, working as a maid, hiding something. The night before, Rachel had given him a small piece of the puzzle. 2 years of employment, no prior experience listed, no emergency contacts. As if Wesley had erased her past and rebuilt herself from nothing. That wasn't the woman he knew. The Wesley Harper he had married was ambitious, elegant, born into wealth. She had walked through life with effortless grace, never needing to bow her head to anyone. And yet, last night, she had looked at him with something dangerously close to fear. Uriel exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. He needed answers. And if Wesley wouldn't give them to him willingly, he would find another way. Wesley rushed through the employee entrance of the Cascade Grand Hotel, adjusting her uniform and praying she wasn't late. The moment she stepped into the back corridors, the sounds of the luxury hotel faded into the steady hum of staff conversations, clinking dishware, and the occasional barked orders from supervisors. She kept her head down as she made her way toward the linen closet, but the weight pressing against her chest had nothing to do with work. It had everything to do with Uriel. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. The shock in his expression when he recognized her. The sharp edge in his voice when he demanded answers. But what haunted her most was the realization that despite everything, despite the years, the distance, the pain, Uriel Calloway still had the power to unravel her. And she couldn't afford that. Not now. Not ever. She was folding fresh towels onto the cart when a voice cut through her thoughts. "Morning, Harper." Wesley looked up to find Julia Adams, the hotel manager, standing in the doorway. Her stomach clenched. "Morning," she replied carefully. Julia stepped inside, crossing her arms. "I had an interesting conversation last night." Wesley forced herself to stay still. "About—" "Uriel Calloway." Julia's gaze was sharp, assessing. "He's asking questions about you." The air in Wesley's lungs turned cold. Julia took a step closer. "You want to tell me why one of the most powerful men in this city suddenly has a vested interest in one of my housekeepers?" Wesley's fingers curled into the towels. "He's my ex-husband." Julia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "That's what I figured." She studied Wesley for a moment longer before exhaling. "Look, Harper, I don't care about your past, but I do care about my hotel. If this turns into some kind of drama that affects my staff, it's going to be a problem." Wesley nodded stiffly. It won't be. Julia didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she glanced at her clipboard. Good, because I need you to handle the VIP floor today. Executive suites. You think you can handle that? Wesley's stomach twisted. She knew exactly where Uriel's suite was. Yes, she said, keeping her voice steady. Good, Julia said, already turning for the door. Ann Harper. Wesley met her gaze. If you need time off for personal reasons, take it. For a brief second, something almost like kindness softened Julia's expression. Then she was gone. And Wesley was left with a growing sense of dread curling in her chest. Uriel wasn't expecting it when the knock came at his door. He had been pacing, drinking his second cup of coffee, trying to figure out his next move when he heard it. Firm measured. For a split second, he thought it was Rachel. Then he opened the door. And there she was, Wesley. His breath hitched. She stood there, her uniform neat, her hands gripping the cleaning cart like it was the only thing keeping her upright. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she lifted her chin, forcing out the words. I'm here to clean the room, sir. Uriel exhaled, leaning against the doorframe. Really? It's my job. He let the silence stretch between them, waiting. But she didn't drop the act. She didn't acknowledge what was happening, what they were to each other. Fine. If she wanted to play this game, he would too. Then do your job, he said, stepping aside. Wesley hesitated, just for a second, before pushing the cart inside. Uriel shut the door behind her, watching as she moved through the room with practiced efficiency. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on straightening the pillows, adjusting the curtains, wiping down the counter. It was surreal. Wesley Harper, the woman who once attended exclusive black-tie galas and drank champagne on yachts, was now making his bed like a stranger, like she hadn't once belonged here. Uriel crossed his arms. How long were you planning on keeping this a secret? Wesley's hand stilled on the sheets, but she didn't look at him. It's not a secret. My life just isn't your concern anymore. That's where you're wrong. She let out a sharp breath, finally turning to face him. Uriel, don't do this. Do what? Dig into my life. Act like you suddenly care. His jaw tightened. You think I don't care? You didn't before. The words sliced through the air between them, heavier than anything she had said before. Uriel exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. I thought you were fine, Wesley. After the divorce, you assumed I landed on my feet, that I went back to my family, that I kept living the perfect little life you always thought I had. He didn't answer. Because yes, that's exactly what he had assumed. But now, looking at her, standing in front of him in a uniform that didn't fit, her hands trembling against the fabric, he realized how wrong he had been. Wesley shook her head. I don't need your pity. This isn't pity. His voice was quiet. This is me trying to understand what happened. She swallowed hard, her mask slipping for just a moment. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me. She let out a small, bitter laugh. You think, just because you saw me here, you have a right to know everything? Yes, he said, simply. Wesley's breath hitched. For the first time she looked at him. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with something else, something raw. She opened her mouth, as if she was about to say something. Then she shook her head. I have work to do, she whispered. Uriel watched her turn back to the bed, watched as she continued making it, her shoulders stiff, her movements mechanical. And he knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't over, not even close. Uriel watched Wesley move around his suite with mechanical precision, straightening pillows, wiping surfaces, avoiding his gaze as if looking at him too long might undo her. She was running from him. But what she didn't understand, what she refused to accept, was that he wasn't the kind of man to walk away from unfinished business, especially not when it came to her. He let the silence stretch between them, the tension thick, pressing in on both of them. She was trying to make this just another part of her routine, as if this was nothing more than a job. But he wasn't going to let her pretend. "When was the last time you saw Zara?" he asked suddenly. Wesley froze, her hand tightening around the cloth she was using to wipe down the nightstand. It was the reaction he had been waiting for. Slowly she straightened, turning to face him, but her expression was carefully controlled. "That's not your concern." Uriel's jaw tightened. "She asked about you." Something flickered in Wesley's eyes. Guilt, pain, something she tried to bury. But it was there, just beneath the surface. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Use her to get to me." His chest tightened. "That's not what I'm doing." "Isn't it?" Wesley let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You suddenly care about my life, my choices, my job, but you never cared before. Why now, Uriel?" He took a step closer. "Because I thought you were fine." Her breath hitched, but she didn't move away. "Because I thought you left me and went back to your old life. Because I thought you had everything you needed," he continued, his voice low, rough. "But I was wrong, wasn't I?" Wesley's fingers trembled as she clenched the cloth in her hands. "It doesn't matter. It does to me." She shook her head. "Why? Why does it matter to you now?" "Because I don't recognize the woman standing in front of me," he admitted, his voice raw, "and that scares the hell out of me." For a moment she just stared at him as if she wanted to believe him but couldn't afford to. Then, without another word, she turned back to her cleaning. Uriel watched her move through the room again, this time with more urgency, as if needing to put distance between them. But he wasn't letting her off that easily. "You can't just disappear from your daughter's life, Wesley." She stilled, her back to him. "I didn't disappear," she said softly. "Then where have you been?" Her shoulders tense. "I can't do this with you." Uriel's patience snapped. "Then who can you do it with?" "Because Henry sure as hell doesn't have the answers I need, and Julia's only concern is her hotel's reputation." Wesley turned sharply, her eyes flashing. "You've been talking to them." He held her gaze. "You didn't give me much of a choice." A quiet, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Of course. Uriel Calloway, the man who gets what he wants, no matter the cost." "Is that what you think this is?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think I'm doing this because I want to win? Aren't you?" Uriel exhaled sharply. "No, Wesley. I just want to understand why the woman I loved is living like a ghost of herself." Her breath hitched at the word loved, but she quickly masked it. She turned back to her work. "You need to let this go, Uriel." He shook his head. "I can't. Then you'll be disappointed." Silence settled between them again, but this time it was heavier. Uriel studied her, the woman who had once stood beside him in a world of power and privilege, now gripping a rag as if it were the only thing holding her together. He had been so wrong about her, and that realization cut deeper than he was willing to admit. Wesley left Uriel's suite as quickly as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been careful. For years, she had been careful, avoiding places he might be, making sure their worlds never collided. But now, in the span of 2 days, everything was unraveling. She should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Uriel had never been the kind of man to let things go. As she pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, she barely noticed Henry approaching until he fell into step beside her. "That bad, huh?" he asked. She let out a slow breath. "He's not going to stop." Henry sighed, running a hand over his face. "You knew that the second he saw you." "I thought maybe if I ignored it." "You can't ignore Uriel Calloway." Wesley closed her eyes, exhaustion weighing on her. I know. Henry hesitated before speaking again. You could tell him, Wes. She shook her head instantly. No. He's not the enemy. Wesley looked at him sharply. You think I don't know that? Henry held up his hands in surrender. I just think he deserves to hear it from you instead of figuring it out on his own. Her throat tightened. It doesn't matter anymore. Henry sighed but didn't argue, because they both knew Uriel was going to find out, one way or another. That evening, Uriel sat in his suite, his laptop open in front of him, but his mind wasn't on business. It was on Wesley, on Zara, on the questions that had no answers. Then, as if the universe was daring him to dig deeper, his phone vibrated on the table. A message from Rachel. I found something. Call me. Uriel picked up the phone without hesitation. Rachel answered on the first ring. I ran a background check on Wesley. His stomach tightened. And? Rachel exhaled. You're not going to like what I found. Uriel's grip on the phone tightened. Tell me. Rachel was quiet for a moment before she spoke again, her voice softer now. Uriel, she didn't walk away from her life. It was taken from her. The world tilted. For the first time since seeing Wesley again, Uriel felt something cold settle in his chest. And he knew. Whatever had happened to her, whatever had driven her to this life, was much worse than he had imagined. And he was going to find out the truth. No matter what it took. Uriel stood at the window of his penthouse suite, gripping his phone tightly. Rachel's words echoed in his mind, unraveling every assumption he had made about Wesley. She didn't walk away from her life. It was taken from her. The weight of it settled in his chest, like a storm brewing on the horizon. He had spent years believing that Wesley had chosen to leave, that she had abandoned their marriage to return to a life of privilege. But if that wasn't the truth, if something had forced her into this life, then everything he thought he knew was a lie. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to speak. What do you mean, Rachel? Her voice was careful, measured. I dug into her records. After the divorce, she didn't go back to her family. In fact, they cut her off completely. Uriel's stomach twisted. I assumed she had their support. She didn't. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her name was wiped from all family assets. The townhouse she was supposed to inherit, gone. Every safety net she had vanished overnight. Uriel clenched his jaw, his free hand tightening into a fist. Who did this? Rachel hesitated. It wasn't just one person. It was deliberate, calculated, and there's a name that kept coming up in the legal records. A pause, then she said it. Marcus Grayson. Uriel's blood turned ice cold. His rival. The man who had spent years circling his business, trying to undermine him at every turn. And now, Marcus had a connection to Wesley? Uriel exhaled sharply. What did he do? Rachel's voice softened, almost as if she knew how much this would affect him. It looks like he played a role in orchestrating her downfall. There are signed affidavits, backroom deals, and a suspicious settlement agreement that left her with nothing. Whatever happened, it wasn't an accident. Uriel's grip on the phone was so tight, his knuckles turned white. And she never told me? Maybe she thought you wouldn't believe her. The words cut deep, because years ago, he might not have. Uriel ran a hand down his face, inhaling slowly, forcing himself to think. Rachel, I need you to find out everything, every deal, every document. If Marcus had a hand in this, I want proof. Already on it. He ended the call, his pulse roaring in his ears. Marcus Grayson had taken everything from Wesley, and Uriel hadn't even known. But now, he was going to fix it. Wesley knew she was being watched. She felt it the moment she walked into the staff lounge the next morning. The weight of curious glances pressing against her like an unseen force. The hotel was its own ecosystem of whispered rumors and careful observations, and news traveled fast. especially when it involved someone like Uriel Calloway. She forced herself to move through the space like she didn't notice, grabbing a coffee from the vending machine and heading toward her locker. But the moment she reached for the door, a voice stopped her. "You okay?" She turned to find Henry leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching her carefully. She let out a slow breath. "I'm fine." Henry didn't look convinced. "Word is Calloway's been asking about you." Of course he had. Wesley swallowed hard, shoving her bag into the locker. "I can handle it." Henry let out a quiet sigh, pushing off the counter. "Wesley, listen to me." The sound of the lounge door opening cut him off, and when Wesley turned, her breath caught. Uriel stood in the doorway. The room went silent. Hotel staff exchanged glances, murmuring under their breaths. It wasn't every day a man like Uriel Calloway strolled into the employee lounge, and it definitely wasn't every day. He fixed his gaze on one person with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "Can we talk?" Uriel's voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something unshakable. Wesley stiffened. "I'm working. I won't take long." Henry glanced between them, eyes narrowing slightly, but he didn't interfere. He just muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving them standing in the middle of the room, every gaze still lingering on them. Wesley exhaled sharply, lowering her voice. "Uriel, this isn't the place." "Then let's go somewhere else." "I don't. You owe me the truth." The words were quiet, but they landed like a punch to the chest. Her fingers curled into fists, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. "Uriel, please. Marcus Grayson." Her entire body went still. Uriel saw it, the way her breath hitched, the way she instinctively stepped back, as if the name itself was a weapon. And suddenly, it all made sense. It was him, wasn't it? Uriel's voice was sharp now, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "He's the reason you lost everything." Wesley swallowed hard, shaking her head. "This isn't something you can fix, Uriel. Try me." Her vision blurred for a second, a rush of memories slamming into her all at once. The meetings, the papers she had been forced to sign, the way her father had turned his back on her while Marcus Grayson stood in the background, waiting to take everything away. It had been a war she had lost. And now, standing in front of Uriel, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't going to let it go. "You have to stay out of this," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Uriel's jaw clenched. "Not a chance." She let out a slow breath, forcing herself to steady. "Uriel, you don't understand what he's capable of. This isn't about pride. It isn't about proving anything. This is my life now, and I need you to leave it alone." Uriel stared at her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. And then, quietly, he asked, "Is that what you really want?" She should have said yes. She should have turned around and walked away. But she couldn't. Because the truth was, a part of her had never stopped believing that if anyone could stand against Marcus Grayson, it was Uriel Calloway. And that terrified her more than anything. Uriel took a slow step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You may have accepted this life, Wesley," he murmured, "but I haven't." She sucked in a sharp breath, her pulse stuttering, and in that moment, she knew. This wasn't over, not even close. Uriel couldn't shake the image of Wesley's startled eyes, the moment when the name Marcus Grayson had slipped from his lips and shattered the fragile wall between them. In the silent aftermath, the air between them had been so thick, he could almost taste the bitterness of old regrets. Now, as the day waned and the soft glow of twilight filtered through the Cascade Grand Hotel's glass facade, Uriel found himself wandering the corridors of the hotel, trying to piece together the fragments of a past that he'd long assumed was buried. He passed by an elegantly decorated lounge, where soft jazz played in the background and guests spoke in hushed tones about deals and investments. The opulence of it all contrasted sharply with the raw pain he now felt, a pain that pulsed every time he thought of Wesley and the life she'd been forced into. He couldn't help but wonder, what if she'd once been the vibrant, fearless woman he had loved? And what demons had Marcus Grayson awakened in her that made her retreat into this life of quiet suffering? Uriel's phone vibrated abruptly in his hand, and he glanced at the screen. Rachel's name. With a weary sigh, he answered. Rachel. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. I've gathered more information on Wesley's financial records and the legal documents from her divorce. There's a lot you need to know. Uriel's grip on the phone tightened. Go on. There are statements from several lawyers indicating that her assets were not just withheld. They were stripped away entirely, and it wasn't a bureaucratic error. It was deliberate, Rachel explained, her tone heavy with the weight of what she'd uncovered. Uriel's heart pounded. Deliberate, by Marcus Grayson. Exactly. There are emails, signed agreements. It's all there. Marcus orchestrated a settlement that left her with nothing, and it appears he had both personal and business motivations, she said softly. Uriel ran his hand through his hair, his mind racing with a mixture of anger and sorrow. I always thought I understood our divorce. I thought I was protecting her, protecting myself. But I was blinded by pride and by my own assumptions. There was a pause on the line, and Rachel added gently, Uriel, you have to be careful. Digging into this might reopen old wounds, for both of you and for Zara. But if you truly want to set things right, you need to know the full story. He closed his eyes, feeling the burden of responsibility and regret. I'm not going to let Marcus get away with this. Wesley deserves better, and so does Zara. After ending the call, Uriel stood in silence for a long moment. Determination and guilt warred within him. He had to confront the past, not only for himself, but for the woman he once loved and the daughter who deserved truth and stability. Later that afternoon, as the hotel began to quiet down for the evening shift, Wesley found a rare moment of solitude in the staff break room. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft murmur of distant voices were a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. She sat at a small table, a cup of lukewarm coffee trembling in her hands, her thoughts spiraling back to the encounter with Uriel. Her mind replayed every word, every look. The intensity in his eyes when he mentioned Marcus's name had shattered her carefully constructed facade. For years, she had locked away the memories of the life she had once known. A life of luxury, of hope, and of love, and replaced them with the relentless routine of survival. Yet now his probing had reopened wounds she had desperately tried to keep hidden. Wesley? A soft voice startled her from the haze of her thoughts. It was Henry, his presence steady and comforting as always. He sat down opposite her, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Henry, She hesitated, searching his face for any sign of judgment. I'm not sure I can keep running from my past. Henry leaned in slightly, his voice tender yet firm. Running won't fix anything, Wes. You deserve to be heard, to have your truth known, even if it's painful. And maybe, just maybe, it might give you the chance to reclaim who you once were. Wesley looked down at her coffee, her hand shaking. But what if he doesn't want to hear it? What if Uriel is just angry? I've spent so many years burying everything, pretending that it didn't matter. I don't know if I'm strong enough to face him again. Henry reached out, resting a reassuring hand over hers. You're stronger than you think. And Uriel, he's been chasing answers because he still cares. You owe it to yourself to let him in, even if just a little. Zara deserves to know her mother, and you deserve to be seen for who you truly are. Wesley's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, Henry. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. Across town, Uriel paced the quiet halls of his penthouse, the events of the past few days weighing heavily on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that every moment was drawing him inexorably back to Wesley, and that what had been hidden for so long was now a chasm he needed to bridge. He decided to call her, to ask for a meeting, one where they could both speak openly, no pretenses, no running away. That evening, after a long day filled with meetings that had all blurred into one another, Uriel sent a terse message to Wesley. We need to talk. Tomorrow at the hotel cafe, before shift changes, please. He didn't know what to expect. Would she refuse? Would she ignore him, retreating further into her shell? But the alternative, remaining in this silent stalemate, was unbearable. The questions, the guilt, the unspoken longing for what they once had, it was all too much. The next morning, as the early light filtered through the rain-dappled windows of the Cascade Grand Hotel, Wesley found herself nervously waiting in the small, understated hotel cafe, a quiet space frequented by staff during their breaks. Her heart pounded so loudly she could almost hear it echo in the empty chairs. Every few seconds she glanced toward the door, half expecting it to swing open and reveal Uriel, the man who had once been her partner in life, and now her most complicated adversary. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. Uriel stepped inside, his posture tense but his expression softer than it had been during their last encounter. He hesitated at the entrance, as if weighing his next words before approaching the table where she sat. Wesley, he greeted, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and regret. He took a seat opposite her, the space between them charged with years of unspoken words. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Wesley's eyes searched his face, as if trying to decide whether to trust the man who had once meant everything to her. Uriel, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure you'd come. He let out a slow, weary sigh. I've been chasing answers, Wesley, and I realize that running from them only makes things worse. I need to know what happened. How did we end up here? A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain intensified, its rhythmic patter against the glass windows, echoing the steady beat of their hearts. Finally, Wesley spoke, her words trembling with the weight of her past. I never meant for things to fall apart the way they did. I never imagined I'd lose everything, not by choice, but because it was taken from me. Uriel leaned forward, his eyes intent. Taken from you? Who did this to you? Wesley's eyes glistened with tears she fought to contain. Marcus Grayson. He was involved. My family, my inheritance, it all vanished. I was left with nothing, and I couldn't face it. I couldn't face you, knowing how much I had to lose. Uriel's voice broke slightly. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was giving you space, so you could rebuild your life. I had no idea you were being forced into this. Wesley shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. You were always in your world, Uriel, the boardrooms, the deals. You assumed I was fine because you were never really there for me. I had to fend for myself. I had to become invisible. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering just inches from hers, then finally resting gently atop hers. I'm sorry, he murmured, the sincerity in his tone cutting through the silence like a knife. I was so blinded by my ambition, by my need to win, I didn't see you slipping away. Tears welled in Wesley's eyes as she withdrew a shaky breath. I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to be strong, to survive. But surviving meant losing parts of myself, parts of us. Uriel's gaze softened, his eyes reflecting both remorse and determination. Then let me help you rebuild, not just for Zara, although she deserves the truth, But for you, I can't change the past, Wesley, but I can promise that I won't let Marcus Grayson continue to hurt you. I want to make things right. The words hung between them, fragile and hopeful, as the storm outside reached its crescendo. Wesley looked down at their joined hands, her heart pounding with conflicting emotions. Anger, sorrow, longing, and perhaps, just maybe, the possibility of forgiveness. I don't know if I can trust you again, she whispered, voice wavering with vulnerability. I don't know if I can let you in after everything. Uriel's grip tightened gently. Maybe trust doesn't come all at once. Maybe we have to earn it back piece by piece. I'm willing to try if you are. For a long moment, the only sound was the relentless rain. Then Wesley nodded slowly, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I'm willing to try, she said, her voice steadier than before. Outside, the rain began to ease, as if acknowledging the tentative truce forming in the small cafe. In that quiet rain-washed moment, Uriel and Wesley shared a look that spoke of shared pain and a mutual desire to reclaim what they had lost, even if the path forward was uncertain. Uriel knew there would be hard days ahead, days filled with confrontations, painful memories, and the ever-looming presence of Marcus Grayson. But he also knew that this was the first step toward healing, a first step toward understanding, forgiveness, and perhaps a future where the past no longer defined them. As they sat there, hands intertwined and hearts unburdening the weight of years, the sound of the approaching day began to fill the space around them. A new chapter was beginning, fragile and tentative, but filled with the promise of redemption. And in that moment, both of them silently vowed to fight for truth, for Zara, and for the love that still lingered between them, waiting to be rekindled. Uriel sat in his car outside the Cascade Grand Hotel, his fingers drumming impatiently against the steering wheel. The early evening sky was painted in hues of gold and violet, but he barely noticed. His mind was fixed on one thing, his meeting with Wesley. She had agreed to talk, had finally let him into the truth she had spent years hiding. And yet, even as she sat across from him in the cafe earlier that morning, there had been something restrained about her, as if she was still holding on to a weight too heavy to share. She didn't trust him yet. He couldn't blame her. His phone buzzed on the console beside him. Rachel. He grabbed it, pressing it to his ear. Tell me you have more. I do. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Uriel, I dug deeper into Marcus Grayson's records. What I found, it's worse than we thought. Uriel's stomach tightened. Go on. The legal documents that forced Wesley out of her inheritance were only the surface. Marcus didn't just manipulate her family into cutting her off. He used her as leverage in a business deal. Your business deal. Uriel's grip on the phone turned to steel. What are you talking about? Rachel exhaled. The year after your divorce, Marcus finalized a series of investments that directly competed with your company. But just before that, Wesley's name disappeared from every major financial record. It wasn't a coincidence. Uriel's pulse pounded in his ears. He destroyed her to get to me. Yes. A pause. And he made sure you wouldn't look for her. Everything clicked into place. Marcus had played him. He had orchestrated Wesley's downfall, not just to punish her, but to eliminate a distraction in Uriel's life. He had counted on Uriel's pride, on his belief that Wesley had chosen to walk away, and Uriel had fallen for it. His stomach twisted with guilt. How could he have been so blind? Rachel's voice softened. What are you going to do? Uriel's jaw clenched. I'm going to fix this. He ended the call and pushed open the car door, his long strides carrying him toward the employee entrance of the hotel. He didn't care if it was inappropriate for him to be there. He didn't care who saw him. He needed to see Wesley. Wesley was exhausted. She had just finished her final round of evening room checks when she spotted Henry waiting for her in the dimly lit corridor near the service elevators. His expression was tense, his arms crossed. She sighed. "Henry, not now. I just need to get home to Zara." "You might want to rethink that," Henry said carefully. "Calloway's here. Again." Wesley stiffened. "What?" "He's looking for you," Henry continued, studying her reaction. "And by the look on his face, it's not for small talk." A cold shiver ran down her spine. Uriel knew something. She took a slow, steady breath. "Where is he?" Henry tilted his head toward the hallway leading to the staff lounge. "Waiting." Wesley hesitated, but deep down she knew she couldn't keep avoiding this. With each passing day, Uriel was pushing deeper into the past she had tried to bury, and if he had come tonight, it meant he had learned something new. Squaring her shoulders, she walked down the hall, ignoring the glances from passing employees. As soon as she turned the corner, she saw him. Uriel was leaning against the wall near the lounge entrance, arms crossed, his piercing gaze locked onto her the moment she stepped into view. The storm brewing in his eyes made her stomach twist. She stopped a few feet away. "You shouldn't be here." Uriel pushed off the wall, stepping closer. "You knew, didn't you?" Her breath hitched. "Knew what?" "Marcus." His voice was low, sharp. "You knew what he did to you. To us." Wesley's entire body went rigid. Uriel exhaled harshly, running a hand through his hair. "Rachel found the records, Wesley. Marcus orchestrated everything. He made sure you were cut off. He made sure I wouldn't come looking for you. He took everything from you because he wanted to ruin me." Her throat tightened. "Uriel, stop. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was raw now. "Why did you let me believe you abandoned everything? That you didn't want me? That you didn't want Zara?" Tears burned the backs of her eyes, because telling him would have meant reliving the humiliation. Because even now, standing in front of him, she still felt like the woman Marcus had crushed beneath his heel. "I had nothing left, Uriel." Her voice trembled. "By the time I realized what had happened, I had lost everything. My home, my name, my reputation. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" His jaw clenched, his expression dark with remorse. "You should have come to me." "And said what?" Wesley's voice rose, emotions unraveling. "That the man you spent years competing with had destroyed my life. That he had convinced my own father to erase me from his will. That I was drowning while you were out building your empire." Uriel stared at her, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You were never supposed to do this alone." "But I did," she whispered, the weight of those years pressing down on her. "And I survived." Uriel's eyes softened, the anger fading into something else, something that made her chest tighten. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "Wesley." She inhaled sharply at the warmth of his touch, at the way his voice carried so much regret, so much unspoken emotion. For a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like, to be held by him, to be protected by him. But then reality crashed back. She pulled her hand away, stepping back. "This doesn't change anything," she said, her voice firm even as her heart ached. "You can't undo the past, Uriel." His gaze darkened. "But I can make sure Marcus never does this to you again." Her breath caught. There was a certainty in his voice, a dangerous promise that sent chills down her spine. "Don't," she warned. "Don't start a war with him because of me." Uriel's expression hardened. "It's not just because of you." Wesley swallowed. "Then why?" "Because he took everything from the woman I love," he said without hesitation. "And I won't stand by and let him get away with it." Her heart stopped. "The woman I love." The words echoed in her mind, unraveling her carefully constructed defenses. Uriel took another step forward, his voice low, unwavering. "I never stopped, Wesley. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but love hadn't saved them before, and she wasn't sure if it could now. Uriel searched her face, waiting, but when she didn't answer, he let out a slow, steady breath. "This isn't over," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm going to fix this, even if you don't believe I can." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Wesley standing in the dimly lit hallway, her heart hammering in her chest, and for the first time in years she realized she was afraid, not of Marcus, not of what he had done to her, but of the way Uriel still had the power to make her believe in something she had long since given up on. Hope. Wesley sat at the edge of her bed, the dim glow from her bedside lamp casting long shadows on the peeling walls of her small apartment. Zara was already asleep in the next room, her soft breathing the only sound filling the silence. But Wesley's mind wouldn't quiet. Uriel's words still echoed in her head, pressing into her like a weight she couldn't shake. "Because he took everything from the woman I love." She pressed her fingers against her temples, forcing herself to take slow, steady breaths. Love. The word felt foreign now, like a distant memory from a different lifetime. She had spent so long trying to forget, trying to convince herself that the past was just that, the past. And yet, Uriel was dragging her right back into it. He had always been relentless, but this was different. He wasn't just looking for answers anymore. He was looking for justice, and that terrified her, because Uriel Calloway didn't know how to lose. A knock at the door snapped her from her thoughts. Her stomach clenched. No one visited her. She hesitated before rising to her feet, moving toward the door with cautious steps. She cracked it open, her breath hitching the moment she saw who was standing there. Uriel. The dim light from the hallway outlined his broad shoulders. His dark eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. He wasn't wearing his usual suit, just a black sweater and slacks, but somehow he still looked powerful, commanding. She swallowed hard. "It's late." "I know," he said quietly, "but I need to talk to you." She hesitated. Letting him in meant opening a door she wasn't sure she could close again, but she also knew he wouldn't leave until he said what he came to say. With a quiet sigh, she stepped aside. Uriel walked in, his gaze sweeping over the small apartment. His eyes lingered on the modest furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the table, the half-empty cup of tea on the counter. She watched as something flickered in his expression, something unreadable, something that made her want to shrink under his gaze. Finally, he turned back to her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She folded her arms over her chest, her nails pressing into her skin. "Tell you what? You know what?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, a quiet frustration that sent a shiver down her spine. She shook her head. "Uriel, we've already been over this." "No." He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "We haven't. Because you're still pretending like none of this matters. Like what Marcus did to you is just something you had to accept." Her throat tightened. "Because it is." Uriel's jaw clenched. "Not anymore." Wesley let out a quiet, breathless laugh, but there was no humor in it. "And what, exactly, do you think you're going to do? Take him down? Destroy him the way he destroyed me?" "Yes." Her breath caught. Uriel's expression was unreadable, but his voice was laced with quiet determination. "I have the power to make this right, Wesley. And I will." She shook her head, stepping back. "You don't understand? Then make me understand." She pressed her lips together, emotions swirling inside her like a storm. And for the first time in years, the truth spilled out. "Because I don't want you to fix this," she whispered harshly, her voice breaking. "I don't want you to come in and save me like I'm some unfinished chapter in your life. I've spent years clawing my way back, trying to stand on my own 2 feet, And if you do this, if you burn everything down just to prove you can, I will never get that back." Uriel stared at her, his expression unreadable, and then, slowly, he stepped closer. Not out of anger, not out of frustration, but out of something else, something softer, something more dangerous. "You think this is about proving something?" His voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "This is about you, Wesley. It's about what was taken from you." She swallowed hard, her pulse hammering. "It's too late. It's never too late," he murmured. She looked up at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. And then, a small voice cut through the silence. "Mommy?" Wesley turned instantly, her breath catching as Zara stood in the doorway of her bedroom, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Uriel went completely still. For a moment, Wesley felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Zara blinked up at Uriel, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. Wesley's heart clenched. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted Zara to see Uriel, to ask the questions Wesley had spent years preparing to answer, but never truly knowing how. Uriel's gaze softened, something in his expression shifting. He took a slow breath. "Zara." The little girl tilted her head, studying him carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you my daddy?" Wesley's stomach dropped. Uriel exhaled sharply, kneeling down so he was at eye level with her. "Yes," he said softly. Zara blinked, her small lips pressing together. "You look different." A small broken laugh escaped Uriel's lips. "So do you." Zara hesitated, looking at Wesley for confirmation. Wesley felt her throat tighten. This was it. The moment she had spent years fearing. The moment she had spent years avoiding. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to steady. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. Zara looked back at Uriel, and then, slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward. Uriel watched her with a kind of reverence Wesley had never seen before, as if he was afraid to move, afraid to break the fragile moment between them. Zara stopped in front of him, studying his face like she was trying to memorize every detail. Then, after a long pause, she reached out, her tiny fingers brushing against his sleeve. Uriel inhaled sharply. Wesley's heart ached. Zara's voice was small, hesitant. "Do you still love Mommy?" The room fell into silence. Uriel's eyes flickered to Wesley's, something raw and unspoken passing between them. Then he turned back to Zara, his voice steady, unwavering. "I never stopped." Zara smiled, small and sleepy, as if that was all she needed to hear. And for the first time in a long, long time, Wesley felt her walls begin to crack. The air inside Wesley's small apartment felt impossibly still. Zara had fallen asleep in her bed again, curled up with her stuffed rabbit, unaware of the emotional storm her simple question had left in its wake. But Wesley wasn't unaware. She could still hear it, the way Zara had asked, the way Uriel had answered. "Do you still love Mommy?" "I never stopped." It was the kind of answer that should have been comforting, that should have filled some hollow part of her chest with warmth. But all it did was remind her of the past. Uriel stood near the window, his gaze on the dark skyline beyond, hands shoved into the pockets of his coat. He was giving her space, letting her breathe, but she could feel the weight of his presence like a force field pressing in around her. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "You shouldn't have come here." Uriel turned, his dark eyes searching hers. "I had to." "No, you didn't," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "You think showing up, telling me what Marcus did, trying to fix things, is going to change anything?" "I think you're scared," he said quietly. Her breath hitched. "I think you're scared that if I fix this, you won't have a reason to keep me out anymore," he continued. She let out a hollow laugh. "That's not it," Uriel. Then tell me what it is. Wesley clenched her jaw, trying to hold back the emotion threatening to break through. You don't get it. You weren't here. You didn't see what it was like. I didn't just lose my money, I lost everything, my home, my family, my dignity, I lost who I was. Uriel took a slow step closer. And you think I don't understand loss? She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. You think I don't know what it's like to wake up and realize everything you built, everything you counted on is gone? His voice was raw, filled with something she didn't expect. Because I do, Wesley. She swallowed hard. Then why are you doing this? Because you deserved better, he said simply. Wesley squeezed her eyes shut for a second, forcing back the sting of tears. Uriel, this isn't your responsibility. His jaw clenched. It should have been. Her eyes snapped to his, but he wasn't done. I should have known something was wrong. I should have questioned it when you disappeared. I should have fought for you. His voice was low now, thick with regret. But I didn't, and I won't make that mistake again. A lump rose in her throat, thick and heavy. She wanted to believe him, but she had believed before, and it had cost her everything. I don't need saving, she whispered. Uriel took another step closer, closing the space between them. I'm not trying to save you, Wesley. I'm trying to stand beside you. Her breath stuttered. She hated how easily he could still do this, how easily he could reach into the deepest parts of her heart and touch the places she had tried to lock away. She shook her head, forcing herself to move, to put space between them. You don't understand. I do. He cut her off, his voice firm. I know what Marcus did. I know how he used you to get to me, and I know you're still letting him win. Her entire body went rigid. Uriel's gaze locked onto hers. You're still living the life he forced you into, Wesley. Tears burned the backs of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I didn't have a choice. You do now, he said softly. Silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. She didn't have an answer for that, because deep down, she knew he was right. For years, she had told herself that this was just the way things had to be, that fighting back was useless. But Uriel was here, standing in front of her, showing her that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. And that terrified her. Finally, she let out a slow breath, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me, Uriel? His expression softened. I want you to let me help. Her chest ached. And then what? Then we take back what's yours, he said simply. She let out a shaky laugh, rubbing her hands over her face. You make it sound so easy. It won't be, he admitted, but it's worth it. She looked up at him, searching his face, trying to find some reason to push him away again. But for the first time in years, she couldn't find one. The fight drained from her limbs, leaving only exhaustion behind. She exhaled. I don't know how to do this, Uriel. His lips pressed together, his voice steady. Then let me show you. For a long time, she just stood there, letting his words settle into the cracks she had spent years trying to ignore. And slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. Okay. Uriel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, something fierce, something unshakable. He had won battles before. He had built an empire from nothing. But this was the fight that mattered most, and he wasn't going to lose. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the old window panes of Wesley's apartment as she sat on the worn-out couch, her arms wrapped around herself. Across from her, Uriel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. She had said okay. She had agreed to let him help. And yet, the weight of that decision pressed heavily against her chest, as if her past was warning her that this was dangerous, that trusting Uriel again would unravel everything she had spent years trying to protect. "You're thinking too much," Uriel murmured. She exhaled sharply. "Of course I'm thinking too much. I just agreed to something that could completely upend my life. Again." Uriel's lips twitched slightly, the barest hint of amusement in his expression. "Wesley, your life was upended a long time ago." Her stomach twisted at the truth in his words. She looked away, her fingers gripping the fabric of her sweater. "What exactly is your plan, Uriel?" "To take Marcus Grayson down," he said simply. She let out a hollow laugh. "Right, because it's just that easy." "No," he admitted, his voice steady. "It's not. But I have resources, information, and power that he doesn't expect me to use against him." Her throat tightened. "And if you do this, what happens to you?" Uriel tilted his head slightly. "You're worried about me?" She frowned, but he wasn't wrong. Marcus wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist, a man who never made a move unless he knew he would win. He had already destroyed her once. If Uriel stepped into this war, he could lose everything. "Uriel, listen to me," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You have everything to lose. Your business, your reputation. This isn't worth it." His expression didn't waver. "You're worth it." Her breath hitched. Uriel leaned closer, his voice softer now. "Do you really think I care about a few business deals? That I'm afraid of a man like Marcus?" He shook his head slightly. "He played me once. That won't happen again." She swallowed hard, struggling against the emotions rising inside her. She wanted to believe him, but belief had cost her before. Uriel exhaled and sat back slightly, his gaze still locked onto her. "Rachel and I have been gathering evidence. Marcus manipulated your father into cutting you off, but we have proof that he did the same to others. He's a parasite, Wesley. He destroys people for sport." Her fingers clenched. "I already know that." "But the world doesn't," Uriel said. "That's about to change." Her heart pounded in her chest. "What does that mean?" "It means we expose him." Wesley let out a slow breath, staring at the floor. This was really happening. After all these years, after all the pain, Uriel was going to fight for her. And that scared her more than anything. "Wesley." She looked up at him again. Uriel's voice was softer now, almost careful. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Her chest tightened painfully, because for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next morning, Uriel stood in the sleek boardroom of Callaway Enterprises, his arms crossed as he watched Rachel swipe through files on her tablet. "I pulled everything I could find," Rachel said, flipping through pages of data, legal documents, and leaked emails. "Marcus has been running a web of manipulation for years, and you were his biggest competitor." Uriel's jaw tightened. "Which is why he wanted me distracted." Rachel nodded. "Exactly. You were too focused on your company, your expansion. And while you were locked in your own battles, he destroyed Wesley's life, right under your nose." A flicker of guilt coiled in Uriel's stomach. Rachel hesitated, then said carefully, "If we do this, Marcus will retaliate." "I'm counting on it," Uriel said flatly. Rachel exhaled, studying him for a long moment. "You really care about her?" Uriel's gaze darkened. "She's the only thing I ever cared about." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then let's end this." Uriel's fingers tightened around the edge of the conference table. Marcus had taken everything from Wesley. Now, it was his turn to lose. Wesley spent the afternoon at work, going through the motions of cleaning rooms, folding towels, and scrubbing floors. But her mind wasn't in the Cascade Grand Hotel. It was with Uriel, with what he had promised, with what she had agreed to. Harper. She turned sharply to see Julia standing in the doorway of the staff lounge, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Wesley swallowed. Yes. Julia stepped inside, her heels clicking against the tile. I had an interesting conversation this morning. Wesley's stomach twisted. With who? Julia's gaze flickered. Marcus Grayson. A cold chill ran through her veins. Julia exhaled, rubbing her temple. He was asking about you, about your newfound connections. Wesley's throat went dry. Julia lowered her voice. I don't know what's going on, Harper, but if Marcus Grayson is sniffing around, you need to be very careful. Wesley forced herself to nod. I understand. Julia studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Just don't bring trouble into my hotel. And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving Wesley standing there, her heart hammering in her chest. Marcus knew. Somehow, he knew. She didn't waste a second. Pulling out her phone, she stepped into the back corridor and dialed Uriel's number. He picked up on the first ring. Wesley. Her breath was shaky. He knows, Uriel. There was a pause. Then, his voice came through, calm but edged with something lethal. Let him. Wesley's hands trembled as she lowered the phone, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Marcus knew. She had spent years trying to stay invisible, carefully maneuvering her life to avoid ever crossing paths with him again. And now, with a single phone call, all of that caution had shattered. She inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. Uriel's last words echoed in her mind. Let him. She didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. Footsteps approached, and Wesley turned sharply to see Henry standing a few feet away, concern etched into his features. You okay? She forced a nod, but he wasn't convinced. Henry crossed his arms. That wasn't a, hey, everything's fine face. That was a, something just went horribly wrong face. She exhaled. Marcus knows Uriel is digging. Henry's jaw tightened. Of course he does. She looked at him. You're not surprised? He sighed. Wesley, you don't spend years pulling strings like Marcus does without keeping tabs on your enemies. And trust me, Uriel was always his biggest competition. She swallowed hard. Then what happens now? Henry's expression darkened. If I had to guess, Marcus is going to make a move. And soon. A chill ran down her spine. She had seen what Marcus was capable of, and Uriel was walking straight into the fire. Uriel stood in his office, staring out at the Seattle skyline, his phone still in his hand. The city lights reflected against the glass, but his focus was elsewhere. Marcus knew, which meant this game had officially begun. A slow exhale left his lips as he placed the phone down on his desk. Across from him, Rachel sat with her laptop open, typing rapidly. He's already trying to cover his tracks, she said without looking up. I just got word that a few of the key witnesses we were planning to use suddenly have no recollection of any wrongdoing. Uriel clenched his jaw. Which means he got to them first. Rachel nodded. Exactly. And if he's moving this quickly, it means he's worried. Good. Let him be worried. Uriel turned, his expression unreadable. How soon can we go public? Rachel hesitated. Uriel, if we do this wrong, Marcus will flip the narrative. He'll paint Wesley as a disgruntled ex-wife trying to drag your name into a scandal. Uriel's hands curled into fists. Then we do it right. We don't just expose him, we bury him. Rachel studied him for a moment before nodding. Then we need something undeniable. Something he can't spin, no matter how much money he throws at it. Uriel exhaled sharply. Find it. Rachel nodded and turned back to her laptop, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. Uriel ran a hand down his face. Time was running out, and Marcus was about to learn what happened when he pushed too far. Wesley was still reeling from her conversation with Henry when her phone buzzed again. Uriel. She hesitated before answering. What now? His voice was steady. I need you to meet me. Her stomach twisted. "Uriel, no arguments," he interrupted. "If Marcus is coming for us, we need to be ready." She exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. "Where?" There was a pause. Then, "Callaway Enterprises. Tonight?" Wesley closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Fine." She ended the call and let out a shaky breath. There was no turning back now. The air inside Callaway Enterprises was crisp, the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne lingering in the lobby. The building was quiet at this hour, the usual hum of employees replaced with a stillness that made Wesley's nerves prickle. Uriel was waiting for her just outside the executive boardroom, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said simply. "You didn't give me much of a choice," she muttered, crossing her arms. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it faded quickly. "Come inside." She hesitated before stepping past him into the sleek boardroom. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, the view of the city stretching out below. Rachel was already inside, flipping through a stack of documents. She glanced up when Wesley entered, nodding in acknowledgement. Wesley turned to Uriel. "What is this?" Uriel exhaled, leaning against the table. "Proof." Her stomach tightened. "Proof of what?" "That Marcus didn't just ruin your life," Rachel said, placing a thick folder on the table. "He's done this before, to a lot of people." Wesley swallowed hard, hesitantly stepping closer. She reached for the folder, flipping it open. Her breath caught. Inside were names, financial records, legal documents, all tied back to Marcus Grayson. "He's been systematically destroying people for years," Rachel continued. "Blackmail, coercion, financial manipulation. You weren't the first, and if we don't stop him, you won't be the last." Wesley's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. "He took everything from me," she whispered. Uriel's voice was low. "Then take it back." She looked up at him, emotions swirling in her chest. "And what happens when he fights back?" Uriel's gaze was unwavering. "Then we hit harder." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Wesley let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Uriel's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw something else in his eyes. Pride. Rachel closed her laptop. "Then let's get to work." And with that, the battle had officially begun. Wesley sat in the dimly lit boardroom of Callaway Enterprises, her fingers tightening around the edges of the documents in front of her. The pages were filled with undeniable proof. Transactions, emails, sealed records. Each one tying Marcus Grayson to an intricate web of manipulation. For years she had believed there was no way out, that Marcus had won. But now, for the first time in a long time, she saw a crack in the walls he had built around her life. Uriel leaned against the edge of the table, watching her closely. "We have everything we need to expose him." She exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temple. "And then what?" "You think the world will suddenly turn on Marcus Grayson because of some financial records?" Rachel, who had been skimming through her laptop, glanced up. "It's not just financial records, Wesley. These documents tie him to offshore accounts, bribery, and fraudulent business dealings that go beyond just your case. If we release this, it won't just destroy his reputation. It will dismantle his entire empire." Wesley's stomach twisted. And what happens if he sees it coming? Uriel's gaze darkened. He already knows something is coming. Wesley swallowed. Marcus wasn't the type to sit back and watch his world burn. He would retaliate. He always did. She had seen it before. She had lived it. Uriel pushed off the table, his voice steady. "The difference now is that we're ready for him." Wesley's breath hitched. There was something so certain about the way he said it, so unshakable, as if there was no doubt in his mind that they would win. She wished she could believe it as easily as he did. She glanced at Rachel. "So what's the plan?" Rachel straightened. We release this in phases. We'll start with strategic leaks, small pieces of information that will make Marcus think he can still contain the damage. While he scrambles to control the narrative, we'll hit him with the full exposure, ensuring that the media, regulatory bodies, and investors all turn against him at the same time. Wesley let out a slow breath. And what happens to me? Uriel's jaw tightened. Nothing. You're not going to take the fall for this. I'll make sure of it. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. You still think you can protect me from him? Uriel's expression hardened. I know I can. She held his gaze, searching for any hesitation, any sign that he wasn't as certain as he claimed to be. But there was none. For the first time, Wesley allowed herself to wonder. What if he was right? What if this was the moment everything changed? Rachel cleared her throat, breaking the tense silence. I'll start setting things in motion. But once we go public, there's no turning back. Wesley's pulse pounded. No turning back. She nodded slowly. Then let's do it. Uriel exhaled, his lips pressing together in determination. We'll take everything from him, the way he took everything from you. And just like that, the countdown had begun. Marcus Grayson sat in his high-rise office, the city stretching out beneath him in a sea of glittering lights. The air inside the room was still, but the tension was palpable. He had been receiving calls all evening, rumors of leaks, whispers of investigations. Someone was moving against him, and he already knew who. His lips curled into a slow, cold smile as he leaned back in his chair. Uriel Calloway. The name rolled off his tongue with amusement, but his eyes burned with something far more dangerous. Calloway had been a thorn in his side for years, but this was bold and foolish. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. The line rang twice before a voice answered. Yes, sir? Marcus drummed his fingers against the desk. It's time to remind Uriel Calloway who he's dealing with. There was a brief pause before the voice responded. Understood. Marcus ended the call and stared out at the city. Uriel wanted a war. Then that's exactly what he would get. Wesley arrived home later than she intended, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. The night air was crisp, and for the first time in years, she felt like something was shifting. Something real. She stepped into the apartment quietly, careful not to wake Zara. But as she moved through the small space, she caught sight of the note on the kitchen counter, a small folded piece of paper. Her breath caught as she reached for it, her hands suddenly unsteady. She unfolded it slowly, her stomach twisting as she read the words scrawled across the page. You should have stayed in the shadows. The air left her lungs in a sharp gasp. Her fingers trembled as she dropped the paper onto the counter, her pulse roaring in her ears. Marcus, he knew. He wasn't just watching Uriel, he was watching her. Wesley took a shaky step back, her heart slamming against her ribs. She needed to call Uriel. She needed to tell him. But before she could move, her bedroom door creaked open. Zara stood there in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Mommy! Wesley's breath hitched as she quickly forced the fear from her face. She moved towards Zara, kneeling in front of her. Hey, sweetheart, did I wake you? Zara shook her head. I had a bad dream. Wesley swallowed hard, pushing the note further onto the counter behind her. She couldn't let Zara see. She forced a small smile. Come here. Zara shuffled forward, wrapping her small arms around Wesley's neck. Wesley held her tightly, her chest aching as she pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. It's okay, baby, she whispered. But it wasn't okay. Marcus had made his first move, and Wesley knew this was just the beginning. Uriel stood at his office window, phone pressed to his ear. The second he heard Wesley's voice, he knew something was wrong. Uriel, she whispered. His spine straightened. What happened? A pause. Then, he left a note. Uriel's blood turned ice cold. Marcus had crossed a line. His grip on the phone tightened. "I'm coming over." "Uriel, I don't care." He cut her off. "I'm coming over." Silence. Then, finally, "Okay." Uriel ended the call, his heart pounding. This had just become personal, and Marcus Grayson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Wesley sat on the couch, staring at the note on the kitchen counter like it might burst into flames. The words etched into the paper, "You should have stayed in the shadows," felt like a hand reaching from the past, yanking her back into the suffocating fear she had spent years escaping. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself, her mind racing. He had been here. Marcus wasn't just retaliating against Uriel. He was reminding her that she would never be free. A sharp knock at the door jolted her out of her thoughts. Her breath caught. She turned, her pulse roaring in her ears. Then, Uriel's voice, low, controlled. "Wesley, it's me." Her body sagged with relief, but the fear didn't leave. She crossed the room quickly, unlocking the door and pulling it open. Uriel stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the space before settling on her. "You're shaking," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her hands. She exhaled sharply, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "I'm fine." His jaw tightened. "No, you're not." He spotted the note before she could hide it. He strode to the counter, picking it up, his fingers curling around the paper. His eyes darkened as he read the words. A slow, simmering rage flickered across his face. "Son of a—" He cut himself off, his breath coming in sharp, controlled inhales. She swallowed hard. "I told you this would happen." Uriel turned to her, his gaze burning. "And I told you we would handle it." She shook her head, stepping back. "You don't understand, Uriel. Marcus isn't just going to let us expose him. He'll make sure we never get the chance." Uriel's expression was unreadable, but his voice was low, unwavering. "He's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet." Wesley let out a hollow laugh. "You think this is over? Uriel, he left a note in my home. What's next?" His eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "He's scared, Wesley. This isn't power, it's desperation. He knows we're closing in, so he's trying to rattle you." She looked away, pressing a hand to her temple. Uriel stepped closer. "I won't let him hurt you." She let out a slow, shaky breath. "You can't promise that." He didn't hesitate. "I just did." Something in his voice made her stomach twist, because he meant it, every single word. Uriel had always been a man of certainty. When he decided something, there was no changing his mind. And right now, he had decided that Marcus Grayson would never touch her again. She exhaled sharply. "What happens now?" Uriel straightened, his expression sharpening. "Now we end this." The next morning, Marcus Grayson arrived at his office, his mood soured by the growing unease settling in his chest. He had been in control of his empire for years, dismantling his enemies before they even knew they were at war. But this felt different. Something wasn't right. He walked into his office, only to freeze in his tracks. His assistant was pale, standing stiffly near his desk. "Sir," she stammered, there's something you need to see." Marcus's eyes flicked to his desk. A folder sat there. Thick, unfamiliar. His pulse kicked up. "What is this?" The assistant swallowed hard. "It was delivered this morning." Marcus stepped forward, flipping it open, and his blood ran cold. Inside were pages of financial records, hidden accounts, emails, everything. His entire operation exposed. His stomach twisted as he turned the pages. Then he saw the final paper, a single sheet with just one sentence. "You should have stayed in the shadows." Marcus's breath hitched, his own words turned against him. His hands curled into fists as realization settled over him like a crushing weight. Uriel Calloway had beaten him at his own game, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Back at Calloway Enterprises, Rachel stood in the conference room, phone in hand. "It's done," she said simply. Uriel stood by the window, staring out at the city, his face unreadable. "And Marcus?" Rachel exhaled. "Cornered. The media already picked up the leaks, and regulators are going to start digging. He won't be able to stop it." Uriel nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Wesley. He had won the battle, but he hadn't won her back. Rachel hesitated. What now? Uriel turned from the window, his expression firm. "Now, I go to Wesley." Wesley stood at the edge of the playground, watching Zara laugh as she played on the swings. The crisp autumn air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. It was over. Marcus had lost. For years she had lived in the shadow of his control, and now he was nothing. So why did she still feel like something was missing? A familiar presence appeared beside her, and she didn't need to turn to know it was him. Uriel's voice was quiet. "It's done." She let out a slow breath. "I know." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Wesley exhaled, hugging her arms around herself. "I don't know what to do now." Uriel turned to her. "You live." Her chest tightened. She finally looked at him, her gaze searching. "And what about you?" Uriel didn't hesitate. "I'm right here." Her breath hitched. He was still offering her something. A future. A chance. But was she brave enough to take it? She swallowed hard, looking back at Zara, who was smiling without a care in the world, and for the first time in years, Wesley felt like maybe, just maybe, she could smile too. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain as Wesley stood outside the cafe, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. Across the street, Zara was giggling as she twirled beneath a tree, catching golden leaves in her tiny hands. Uriel watched them from beside her, his gaze softer than she'd ever seen it. "You're quiet," he murmured. She exhaled, a slow, steady breath. "I don't think I've ever had this before." He turned to her. "Had what?" "A moment where everything just feels okay." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Where I don't have to look over my shoulder." Uriel's expression didn't change, but his hand brushed against hers, warm and steady. That's how it should have always been. A lump rose in her throat. She had spent years running, convincing herself that survival meant shutting out the past, shutting out him. But now, as she stood here, watching Zara laugh, standing beside the man who had never stopped fighting for her, she realized something. Maybe she hadn't just been surviving. Maybe she had been waiting. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, she let herself believe in something she had long thought impossible. Hope. Uriel smiled, as if he already knew, and when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away.